Night House is a little old place where we can use reverse architecture and simple mazes to confuse and confound the dark spirits that seek to do us harm. Night House, baby. Night House, baby. Night House. That's right. It's America's most backward podcast.
Is that
the
right?
Pod People. I'm not Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm Ben Sheets, and I'm getting sick and tired of my backwards house. Makes me feel like a goddamn Australian. My toilet keeps flushing in the wrong direction. I can't
way.
deal with it.
You just can't deal. That's a shame. Well, maybe I can help you deal. I'm Cleveland Mosier, but you can call me the M. Night House of 1,000 Corpse Bridesmaids.
Wow. That is confusing. It confuses and confounds the demons.
It does.
Well, dear listeners, in case you haven't guessed at this point, the film we're talking about this evening is The Night House, the brand new film directed by David Bruckner and starring Rebecca Hall, Sarah Goldberg, Vondi Curtis Hall, and Evan Joningkeet.
That's not a name.
You don't want to mix this one up with Dan Harmon's Monster House?
No, this is not that.
And it's not Animal House either.
It is, contrary to popular belief, unrelated to all of the other films in the House cinematic universe.
It's true.
Which, of course, was kicked off by Dr. House, MD.
Yes.
This is like him, but at nighttime.
It is?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's House, but where everything is lupus, actually. See? Because it's the reverse of the daytime House.
I remember that meme.
Yeah, fuck.
From
Let's go back to
decades
2003, everybody.
Yeah. Let's not, actually. Instead, let's go to the right now in the timeline.
Right now, and talk about The Night House
With this current film.
that just came out. This movie was good.
I loved it.
This was a fantastic example of going into a film with absolutely zero expectations and being rewarded for it.
I couldn't even remember which trailer it was for this movie.
I remember seeing this trailer once. I don't remember what movie we were seeing, but we saw the trailer and we were all like, yeah, that looks pretty cool. And then I proceeded to forget about it until last week.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The soundtrack in the trailer I remember being really good, and the reason I wanted to see it, honestly. I had no idea it was directed by David Bruckner, even.
No, I was about to bring that up. David Bruckner, who also did The Ritual, the Netflix film adaptation of the Adam Neville book.
I hear great things. I haven't watched it yet myself because I'm waiting to read it first, which is probably the next thing on my list.
The book is
honestly.
fantastic. I just reread it recently. I'm rereading Apartment 16 right now. I'm
So good.
I'm a big Adam Neville fan.
Yeah.
And we reviewed the Ritual pretty early on in the show in our first few months because we were still in Milwaukee.
And if you're into Night House, Apartment 16 is a great book, too, because it has more impossible geometry and horrified haunted spatial stuff.
And honestly, like, I have problems with The Ritual, and we talked about them at length on the podcast, and, you know, especially kind of how it deviates from the book in the second half. But it's a movie that I've, like, surprisingly gone back to several times since the initial watch, because every now and then I'm like, man, I kind of want to rewatch The Ritual. And my problems with it are still the same, but at the same time, it's got so much good stuff that I keep going back to it. And I didn't even realize that Night House was by David Bruckner until I saw his name in the credits at the very end. And I think that this is honestly a step up from The Ritual.
Yeah.
I thought this film was quite good. Not a perfect film, but it had a lot going for it, the key of which is originality.
Yes.
It feels like, I know your name kind of alluded to it, Cleve, but it very much feels like a good M. Night movie.
It does.
A rare thing.
Yeah.
I
very
came,
rare
I
thing.
came out of it thinking, like, that was a good M. Night Shyamalan movie. It has a lot of, like, fun twists and turns, It did genuinely keep me guessing for the entire movie, and the payoff was satisfying and unexpected. And these are the qualities of the couple of good M. Night Shyamalan movies that exist.
And much like a good M. Night movie, I feel like it's good the whole way through, but becomes great because it nails the landing.
Because it sticks the landing. Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. I was sitting through this whole movie from very early on being like, man, I'm really enjoying this. How is it gonna fuck up and let me down in the third act? And it didn't. I was genuinely surprised by that, because I just kept thinking, like, this is going to fail to stick the landing. It's too good to be true. And it didn't. The film is about Rebecca Hall's character, Beth, who is a teacher whose husband has just mysteriously killed himself for no reason that she can discern. And in sort of her process of dealing with her grief and her anger at him for killing himself and leaving her behind, she starts to discover some rather sinister secrets about him as she kind of like unravels that mystery and gets sucked into the supernatural.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'll say too, I had no memory of the trailer. I couldn't tie it to the film when we went in. I did watch it, but I think I had been drinking at the time or something. Its memory was completely erased. Oh, I do remember. Oh, it's the movie that has a scary Bannister shot in it. And that was all I remembered from the trailer. And I'm very glad I went in that way, because I felt like the setup with her backstory and everything is much better just given directly in the film. It's really gratifying. There's no way to like talk about it without, and we think we've already started on it. But
yeah, I would.
So forewarnings, I would go into this movie blind.
I would too. We've given you the basic sort of outline. If you're interested in this movie, I would definitely suggest going to see it.
It's very reliant on audio, so it's a great theater movie for that alone, or at least to watch with surround sound and all the fixins, because it's very, very audio reliant.
And the unraveling of the mystery is really satisfying too. So I think going in pretty blind is good. So from here on out, we'll be getting into spoilers pretty quickly, I think. So be warned, if you want to see this one blind, now's your chance.
Yes. Let's just start from the top.
Sure.
I loved how they tell you that, and again, spoilers from here on out, that they tell you her husband killed himself without doing it. This film gives you all the little nuggets you need before it actually gives you that exposition. Another great example is how they use the framing very carefully to introduce that the husband was an architect. In the opening, the first few scenes of the film, they're all really tight shots on our protagonist, and we can't really see the larger aspects of the house. We only get one key that the husband was an architect when she wakes up off the floor. The first she wakes up after that night and she's was sleeping on the floor. She's sleeping next to flat files. And I clocked that and was like, oh, her husband's an architect or an artist or something. Interesting. And that's all they show, which is pretty impressive, because later on when the camera does pull back out, the whole house is riddled with architectural drawings. It's clearly an architect's home. So it was really cool that they were very careful with the framing early on to have that epiphany come and just let you focus on the main character and get to know her first before the husband is introduced. And we get to know the husband through her as opposed to just get to know both of them at the same time, which helps us snuggle nicely into our protagonist's perspective. I loved that, and she's great.
Yeah, Rebecca Hall gives a really fantastic performance in this.
So relatable, believable.
Yeah, she's the emotional center of the movie, and she's really fucking good. I think she's also working with a really well-written script as well. I was really impressed with how natural all the dialogue feels. It feels like the way that people actually talk to each other and not movie lines.
Yes.
And I mean, I know that's a little thing, but it makes a lot of difference, especially when the central conceit of this movie is all the supernatural and horror stuff aside, it is a story about coming to terms with death. And that, I think, makes it the best kind of horror movie because it has a very relatable, very human story at its center that is enhanced by the elements of horror and the supernatural. But that core is there, and it's really strong. So the added layers just feel like they're building on top, to use architectural metaphors, they're building on a very solid foundation. So that, like, the ultimate construction feels sturdy and well thought out.
It's the best kind of detective narrative where, yeah, the world, like you said, is like well fleshed out, it's well worked up, but we start with a very small piece of it, and as the narrative as the aperture, right, the lens, like, expands and opens up, we can see more of what's going on. It's the old three men and an elephant, where all three men are blind, each one is touching a different part of the elephant. We only understand like one small part of it, we don't understand that's an elephant, right? Until like we get the whole perspective, we slowly, expand our view of the story. And I thought that was really well done. And it's done both visually, as I explained earlier, and also narratively. So yeah, it's a really clean story, and I love the detectiving. I think some of my favorite detective narratives are often ones where the protagonist isn't actually a detective.
Yeah, exactly.
Those tend to be the best, because they still hit all the beats, and this one, the beats all felt natural. The only one that felt a little bit, it felt kind of fairly stereotypical, is when she's going through the books and she finds like the bookstore on the back. But I still enjoyed it because it was good sleuthing on her part, but it is a very detective-y, noir sort of thing to do.
And much like a good noir detective story, our protagonist, our sleuth, spends half of the film drunk out of their mind.
Yes.
And like that,
yeah, she's a Bogart character if there ever was.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what feels so like authentic about the character too, is that like she's not just like your typical mopey widow in one of these movies where like dealing with grief is just her being sad all the time. She has so much resentment and anger as well and like she's rude, really rude to like the people who are trying to help her and stuff.
Well, I love it because she's anything but sensitive, right? She is not a sensitive person. And she's often much, much less sensitive than the people around her.
Yeah.
And I love that. It always puts her in a position of power because the people around her are trying to tiptoe around, and she doesn't have any fucking time for that shit. If she wants to talk about her feelings, she's going to.
Like when she's out with her colleagues after school, like drinking, and she like pulls her husband's suicide note out of her purse, and like all of her friends are so like deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's dick on the table.
And like, yeah, it's like, oh, like we shouldn't do this. Like she doesn't want to. Like we shouldn't be asking her questions like this. Like she doesn't want to talk about it. She's like, oh no, it's fine. He left a note. Let me read it for you. And it's like,
yeah, like it's so good, and it doesn't feel like necessarily cruel either, because again, like she needs to talk about it, but also it's great too because it's just from that perspective, like, well, you opened this box, like
it's like, oh, we're gonna let it out, all right, here we fucking go, let's fucking do it.
Yeah. My favorite example of that, and one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is when she's a teacher, right, and one of the mothers comes of a kid comes into her class asking about a grade. And and it's like her son got a C, like it's not even a failing grade because he didn't do his like end of the year presentation
because he brought it in the last day of school, and like she wasn't there because her husband shot himself. Of course she doesn't know that, the mom doesn't know that at the time.
Well, see, we don't know that at the time either. What's so great about that scene is that's the reveal. Like we know that her husband is dead. We can infer that because like the movie starts with her like coming back from the funeral
and that he's grieving
and taking the casserole that one of her friends has given her and just throwing it straight in the trash.
There's a mom.
Oh, yeah, maybe it was her mom.
I'm pretty sure it was her mom.
And we see her, like laying in bed, sort of like wistfully, like caressing the empty space where he is. So it's like, okay, we can assume that her husband is dead. But it's in that scene where the mom is just like, she's not even being a bitch either. That's the thing. Like she's being very smiley about it, but it's still very like, why did you told my son he could make up this assignment, and when he came to do it, you weren't here. Why weren't you here? And eventually she's just like, I was gone because my husband blew his brains out in the boat outside of our house. That's why I wasn't here when your son came in to try to make up the test. And it's like, oh shit. Like,
and her self-awareness is so good. Like it's so good. It's well written, and it's very, very well acted. Yeah. And I love it. She's like, believe that she is both grieving and also like she has no time to like cry and like openly weep about it to herself. She's just like, nope, I'm saying these things. Like I gotta fucking get this off my chest, and it's really powerful.
I love how after she drops kind of that bomb, the mother doesn't know how to respond.
No, because how do you respond to that?
And there's a really funny dialogue about whether it should be an A or a B.
Yeah.
And it kind of emphasizes how inconsequential in comparison it really is. And I just thought that was some great writing.
It's so good. Well, because before she drops the bombshell about her husband killing himself, she's just like, trying to placate this woman. She's like, you know what? Fine. I'm sorry. Like, we'll bump his C up to a B. And the mom's like, well, that's not really what I wanted. That's not what I came here looking for. And, then she kind of drops the bomb about her husband killing himself. And she's like, okay, so I guess we'll just bump it up to an A then. Is that all right? And the mom's just like, a B is fine. And
it is. Okay.
It's like, yeah, all right, it is. Another touch that I really love about that scene is before the mom comes in, she's sitting there at the desk, like scrolling through house listings, right? Because she's looking for, she wants to move out of the house that we find out later her husband built, like, for them. And she sort of dozes off, and she's woken up by the mom coming in. And when she snaps awake out of that, like, what seemingly like momentary dozing off, she looks down at the computer, and it's no longer house listings. She's browsing guns.
Yeah.
I thought that touch was great. And we see that she's been asleep for like 40 minutes. Like, it looks like she just dozed off for a second.
It's great too, because we know like there are several reasons why she's browsing guns, right? I mean, first and foremost, because obviously her husband shot himself, so she's looking at different types of guns to maybe better understand why. Like, why did he buy this one? Better understand that. As the viewer who doesn't know her character very well at that point, like, we could think like, oh my god, is she like, questioning, like her life at this point?
Well,
like,
see, I got the impression that she had done it like in her sleep, because she starts sleepwalking. So like when she comes out of that and sees like the guns on the page, she's like startled by it. She's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So like but
it would still be like at the time, especially, like I was still thinking like there was a subconscious reason, whether it was like active or not. And that would be it. But there was also too the fact that like she'd heard that knock at her door the previous night too, and it's like, hey, maybe she just needs some home defense, like.
Right.
The thing about her falling asleep and looking at guns is further emphasized in that bit of dialogue where she emphasizes that she didn't even know he had a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
That's
so
right,
some of that complexity is kind of just unraveling how we even got to this point.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a great bit of character building, is because like throughout the movie, it's her just kind of trying to figure out why.
Yeah.
And her sense of grieving is looking to find closure in the situation.
And what's really great is in her searching and speculating, she kind of hits the nail on the head halfway through the movie. There's a point where she said, again, we're already in spoilers. There's a point where she says, maybe it was like, like I was always the one who had darkness in me.
Yeah.
Maybe it was like some of that, like that I poisoned him, with my own darkness or whatever, because he was always so happy. Mm-hmm. And it's not too far. Like,
no, it turns out to kind of be the case.
And I like that. I like that she gets really close to it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because it ends up being especially important later. The suicide note, and then her confession to her friend Claire after they get back from the bar. First, she reads them the note, which says simply, "You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is after you. you're safe now. That's what the note says. And at the bar, she tells her friends, like, I have no idea what it means. It doesn't make any sense. Her friend Claire takes her home later, and on the couch, she drunkenly confesses, I do know what the note means. When I was young, when I was like a teenager, I was in a car accident. I died for 4 minutes. And, people asked, what did you see? And the answer is nothing. There is nothing after death. Just emptiness, blackness. And she said the important thing is that her husband never believed that. He always argued against the idea that there's nothing on the other side. So for him to, in the suicide note, admit that she's right and that there is nothing, like, that is sort of a blow for her, and also something why she feels more guilty for, like, infecting him with that, right? Because he was so positive and optimistic before and believed in something on the other side of death. So that to admit that she's right, seemingly what he's doing, it furthers her guilt. We'll talk about it later when we get around to the end of the film, how that note comes around in, like, such a satisfying way, and, like, the context of it changes. But yeah, it's a very important aspect of the story.
It most definitely is. Earlier I'd mentioned that this film tells you a lot of things before it tells you. Another key one is when she, at the very beginning, she wakes up the next morning and she goes down the dock. She sees the boat down there, and she hears a gunshot.
And footprints.
And footprints, watery footprints. And she hears a gunshot, and birds fly off behind her. And it's quite startling. And then she heads off to the school.
I will say, if there's one thing that I kind of didn't like about this movie, is that I think it is a little bit heavy-handed on the jump scares.
Yeah, and they do it a lot through dream sequences in particular. And I get why they're doing it, because we'll talk about some of that in the third act section, but I still think it was a little much on how much they did.
I think a couple of the jump scares work well, but yeah, there's a lot of jump scares, particularly in the first half of this movie, and it's just like, all right, chill out a little bit.
It's not what I would ask for in this film. I do appreciate that it does sort of fit the theme. Like each jump scare is a reference to the fact that her husband shot himself. It's the gunshot, right? Like it's a motif. Like, and if you're gonna do a jump scare, doing it as a motif is a pretty good way to help win me over in the difficult battle that it is to win me over on jump scares, because I'm not a fan of them. I don't like jump scares.
It's just an instance where
it usually feels cheap.
Less is more.
Yeah, but here they felt earned to me, and I'll be real too. Almost all of them scared me. And again, like, whether it scared me or not is not usually a good metric. And but in this case, it scared me, and I do mean, like, terrified me, not as in startled me. Most jump scares startle me, like, by design.
Point of a jump scare.
And I hate that, like, because it's fake. I'm not actually afraid or terrified.
No, it's not fear. You're just startled.
Yeah, and that's obnoxious.
Stop it, son! You're doing me a frighten.
Yeah, like, I don't like that. But here, I was always I was like actually like shocked and scared by each one, which is pretty cool too, because for the majority of them, they're not like corpses coming out of the dark, or like a corpse hand grabbing your shoulder or something like that. It's like just a person running by or something.
Yeah,
and it works. It works quite well to me, because they always were occurring like when she's in like the dream realm. It sets you up well to see that these jump scares usually happen when she's dreaming and when she's in the dream realm. And as reality collapses, less and less when those jump scares are going to happen.
Yeah, because I mean, they're at a certain point, the line between reality and dream becomes pretty much non-existent, which is a disintegration I like. I will say, like, you bring up, like, I agree, not necessarily in reference to the jump scares, but like I did find quite a few parts in this movie, like, pretty scary,
frightening,
like pretty like genuinely spooky, which is not
hard to do for us pod boys.
Like, we're pretty desensitized to that shit, and like I I found like sections of this movie like pretty scary.
This film understands anticipation so well and understands how to frame anticipation. My favorite example.
It's all fucking dread too. Like
Yes.
it's not like a scary ghost popping out or something like that. It's all just like really heavy oppressive dread.
I would compare the pacing and the structure of this movie in a lot of ways to Rosemary's Baby, in that it's kind of an escalation of tension and dread throughout the film until you get to the point of the third act where it's just a massive release. And I think that works super well here. And, I agree with you, Cleve. Like, I think there are several jump scares in this movie that do work really well. I think of the one where the women are running by and jumping off the cliff, and I found that one super haunting, honestly.
Really scary.
The way it's structured and shot is really good, because you see them running by, and then the camera kind of pans around and you see what's actually happening as they kind of fall or jump off the cliff.
Well, and the jump scare that is effective there is that, like, we see a couple of them, like, run and fall off the cliff, and then we think it's done, and it cuts back to her, and then there's another one that runs past, like, after you think it's over, and, like, that's the startling moment. And I did think that one was pretty good.
To put a pin on that, too, I think that there were a lot of really good ones. While I might not agree with all of them, the ones I disagree with are from a personal preference. It's how I might not have wanted to do it myself, or if I had any agency over the matter, I would prefer it to be done. But I thought they were all quality. I find it hard to fault any of them.
I think there are a few too many, but I don't think they were particularly cheap, like most jump scares are.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into that feeling of dread, because there are some shots really worth talking about. In particular, the one where she first encounters like the invisible figure, she believes to be her husband, down by the boat. We get the footprints at the very edge of the dock that are now bloody footprints instead of water, and it starts stepping towards her, and there is this amazing shot that is over her shoulder, just her looking out into the dark night, like out into darkness, out into the void, and it hangs on it for a good while, and it cuts back to it, and it just the framing of it really has you looking into that nothingness, like over her shoulder into it. It's wonderfully framed. I got so many like goosebumps, like looking at the darkness and just waiting, to if what was like, am I going to see something? And the reward of nothingness is so much scarier.
I agree with you, because at that point there have already been several jump scares in the movie, and I was kind of conditioned at that point to expect another one there. And I think that would have been where a movie like The Conjuring or something would have done.
Oh, they wouldn't have been able to resist.
We would have seen the ghost or something.
But this movie has more class.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's conditioned you with like several startling moments. One, just moments before in this scene, and then to have like all of the sound drop out, and like you say, just have that shot over her shoulders, like staring out into like the darkness and the fog above the lake, where we have previously in an earlier scene, she looks out the window of the house and sees like her husband standing on the water out there, like where we've seen so like showing us this like black misty void. You're expecting something to jump out and something to appear, and I agree with you. The fact that it's nothing, that it hangs on that, and that the payoff is that nothing appears is much scarier.
Such a great sense of tension to that scene.
Dread, yeah, like you said.
Well, because it's released too by she looks down and sees that the footprints are now like right in front of her, and she kind of like falls over backward, but ends up like laying down in the boat. Like it's kind of like a cool, like interesting shift of the space that the movie does a few times, where it's like she falls over backwards, like she's gonna land on the dock, but then she's in the boat, and
she's also like
the lake,
fully inside the boat, which doesn't actually make sense to the boat's geometry. Like the boat has like seats on it, but she's laying down like fully in it in that shot, but like horizontally. It's really interesting. I loved that. Yeah. Because that's how dreams are, right? Like that our sense of space, things grow in size and shift, and it all feels natural. And in between all these sequences, we sort of flip back and forth between two characters. The neighbor is an elderly gentleman who is sort of keeping an eye out on her, and is just a good man. And then we have her friend, who is also a teacher at the school. And I really enjoyed both of these characters. The teacher friend, she's a very basic character, but I felt that to be believably basic. Like, she seems just like a very simple person, a very normal person. And she makes a wonderful foil to our protagonist, who is going through so many things and so many abnormal things. And the way that she tries to protect her friend leads to an implication that I think we all had, which is that her friend is in love with her.
There's some pretty heavy homoerotic overtones. I was gonna say undertones, but I'd say overtones.
And I think it is very much a like Sappho and her friend thing where most people won't notice it and pick up on it. I adore that they never say it, because they never need to, and it's so much better, I think, in this context, this specific instance for it, because it would detract from her and her narrative.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like,
it's
there, but it's not so heavy-handed that you couldn't also just reasonably pass it off
as platonic,
as just like very deep platonic friendship. And
but man, the way she says "I love you" and she's leaving is not platonic. I don't think. Anyway,
I agree with you. Like, I agree. I think those overtones are definitely there, and like the way she's kind of like stroking her hair when she's drunk after the bar. That scene's great too, because like we have the close up on Rebecca Hall's face, like as her head's like laying in Claire's lap, and she's like, well, maybe you can just stay until I fall asleep. And that's another jump scare moment where what happens there? Does the stereo turn on, or someone starts banging on the door, or like the building starts rattling? Because like it's the same shot, and there's just all of a sudden like this sort of cacophony of noise, and she sits up and Claire is gone.
Yeah. They were just in the middle of conversation too, and it just, the conversation gets to the perfect point. It is so down to the frame, so masterfully chosen. There's just the right amount of lull in that conversation before just wham, like she's started awake, and that's dreaming. That's falling asleep. You don't remember falling asleep, and I love it when films do that. A similar example is Sandman is very good at it. Those books are wonderful at having you just turn a page and then suddenly the scene has changed. It often slowly lulls you into dreaming, and then like it's an abrupt shift back to wakefulness. And yeah, this film has such a good, well-timed sense of that. I really respect it, and it doesn't need weird filters and effects to do it either. It's all realism. It's all crisp and clean, and that's hard to do.
This movie's like classically surreal, where like it is very heavily dependent on like dream logic and like the weird sort of dreamlike shifting of spaces and time that is common in surrealism, but it does it completely unpretentiously without, as you said, like any weird filters or effects or like neon lighting or anything like that. It's played very straightforward, and I like it a lot, because like it does make sort of like the labyrinthine nature of like the mystery feel more real, and I think that's by design. Like the idea of mazes and confusing architecture is what the movie's all about, and the structure of the film is kind of the same way, but not like in a David Lynch kind of way.
No. And of course, we would be remiss without bringing up House of Leaves, and the series of other films that have been coming out in the past couple of years that have also been very House of Leaves-esque. We have Relic, The Lodge. There's a few others as well that aren't coming to mind. Maybe you'll have some thoughts on that. Shout out to us on Twitter if you come across any others. But I
think about like Relic specifically, like the secret house within the house.
Where there's a varied metaphor, and I think this film comes the closest to House of Leaves, and I adore that about it, because I love that book. It has so many fantastic ideas in it, And frankly, I think that it addresses those ideas with a little bit less mess. Like, it's really clean, and it sticks to all of its themes so well. Whereas House of Leaves goes all over the goddamn place. And if they were to adapt it into a film, you could only really do the Navidson record, like we talked about. Like, you wouldn't want to do, like, the entirety of the book.
And I would even hesitate going that far. Mm-hmm. Like, so much of the success of House of Leaves is based upon, like, the medium, and, like, it's just one of those movies one of those stories that I don't think adapts to film particularly well. Yeah. Even though, like, the core narrative is a written description of, like, a documentary that it's hidden within, like, a meta narrative. House of Leaves is a cool book.
It is a cool book.
I'm due for a reread.
It's a little pretentious, but the ideas, I think, make it well worth it. And here in this film, once again, we do
and it's
a lot of the
spooky.
same things.
Yeah, it's spooky in the same kind of way that this movie is, I think.
Mm-hmm. But House of Leaves is largely about using architecture to describe order made unto chaos, right? Like, as the house becomes more and more strange, our protagonist, who is reading over the manuscript, also slowly unravels and goes insane. So, that works well. Its architecture is order, and as the order breaks down, the house begins to make less and less sense as they have to go spelunking into the basement, right? Like, and they go on these deep cave diving expeditions down staircases, which is super fucking cool. But here, the architecture is used as a different metaphor, and I love that about it. And yeah, this empty house, and that empty space, and what does it mean, is super fucking cool and clean. So yeah, I really love that about it. And that said, though, I think there's plenty of room for more of these movies. Keep them coming. Architectural horror rules, and I love it. Let's keep establishing this genre.
Architectural horror makes me think of the house that Jack built.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
One thing I want to talk about that kind of permeates this movie is the idea of doppelgangers. You have doppelgangers architecturally, but you also have doppelgangers in the literal sense.
Yeah.
And I think that stuff is used really well in this film.
It's so, like, delightfully confounding in the moment, but has such satisfying payoff. She finds some things in her husband's stuff. She goes through, like, his architecture book where he has blueprints for the house that he built for them, but she also finds the same blueprints but reversed, and she finds all this stuff about, like, mazes and non-Euclidean geometry and stuff like that. But she also finds on his phone a picture of a woman that, from the angle, looks just like her, but she's like, I don't think that's me. Like, I don't have that blouse. And, then she then goes on to his computer and later finds, like, dozens of photographs of all of these women who look pretty close to her. They look a lot like her, but not exactly. Like, same type of haircut, eyes, physique, that kind of thing. But it's not her. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, why does he have all of this really weird stuff?
And, she first tells this to her friend, who does the whole, like, okay, drop it. You're going too far. You need to slow down on this. It's probably just you. You're just, having a, you're just grieving.
It's like, I know you're looking for answers, but, like, you're never going to get the real story. Yeah. He's dead. Like, it's not, you're not helping yourself by going down this rabbit hole.
A lesser movie would have had that character say that because she's the secret villain. Or have her and the neighbor be the same character and have her also, like, be the one who knew about her husband, kind of, as the neighbor did. And I wonder if, like, in an earlier version of the script that was the case and, like, they fixed that, because I could very see that being believable, right? Like, she often is protective of her friend and she would withhold that information to protect her. And I love that it's not her, because it would have been too messy. It's much cleaner that it's the neighbor.
Yeah. Her friend is just, like, looking out for her best interest. She's like, look, you're just going to give yourself more grief by looking into this stuff. It's better for you to try to move on, like, why are you opening up these wounds more? And, again, it's just that's just her being a good friend, just caring.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that stuff with doppelgangers plays in super well with kind of the underlying theme of the movie. The overcoming of death, that playing into the grieving process and overcoming a death close to you. And I think, you know, kind of the theme of wanting to repeat what was as close as possible, even though it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
Not really moving the needle anywhere, ultimately. You know, you're buying yourself time, so to speak, but you're not actually progressing.
Yeah, I mean, it's repetition. It's like a record skipping, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, it's cool to go back to the scene where she, like, finds herself in the boat. You know, that ends with her sort of drifting across the lake where she sees, like, the lights of a house that she knows is not there in the daytime. And she gets there, and it is exactly their house, but reversed. And she sees in the window a woman who looks almost like her, but not quite, and she sees her husband, like, start to choke her. And, like, the women who are running off the cliff before that, too, are like, women who are look kind of like her, but not quite. So there's this sense that, like, there's a cycle that's being repeated, like something is happening over and over again, but what is the question?
Because her husband isn't old enough to, like, have done the same thing to other women that he could have done to her several times, right? It's not feasible for it to be a matter of, like, oh, he was secretly a murderer and he's been, like, marrying women and murdering them in this house for ages or whatever, because, like, they're the same age, and they make it clear, too, for, I think, this reason early on, that they were married young.
Yeah, and they've been married for like 14 years.
So
and they're like in their 30s.
Yeah, and that's by design. That's to, like, rule out that that's the case. Because, again, this is a clean movie.
He had, like, a secret life prior to her. Yeah, I know. I think you're absolutely right. It's like she has been with him for pretty much the entirety of their adult lives almost. So, like, she has known him so long and so well that these things that she's discovering about him literally don't make any sense, because, like, she's been around all of this time. She hasn't seen any signs of this. His death was a surprise. Well, then she goes in the daytime, in her waking life, she goes to the other side of the lake and is sort of tromping around through the woods and does find a unfinished house that is the same floor plan but reversed. And when she goes in there, she finds this statue of, like, a woman with her wrists bound to her ankles and, like, impaled full of, like, spikes. It's very reminiscent of, like, the Wound Man, but sort of hogtied. And also, like, what a fucking weird thing to find in an unfinished house that is the exact floor plan of the house that your husband built, but reversed.
Yeah, it's like a fetish, in the traditional sense, or like a voodoo doll.
Yeah.
You know, or Vodun. And
Well, she does find that later in one of his books.
the Kydra, yeah.
Yeah.
If that's how you pronounce it. I want to copy that book, honestly. Like, it's super cool. I love the maze architecture, like, print on the front, and the cult information inside seemed pretty neat. Yeah, that was lovely. And it's neat too, because it's not like a one-to-one house. It's dilapidated. It's unfinished. It's kind of run down. Like, it hasn't. There's no real walls. It's just tarps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which makes it, like, creepier.
But the floor plan is in place. And it's the same but reversed.
To which it's then revealed that by the neighbor that the husband he once encountered, the husband taking someone out there who looked like her.
Yeah, he thought it was her. He thought it was the two of them together until he called out and she turned around and realized that it was somebody different.
And then later on, he accounts that he came to his house like late at night and just knocking on the window, which is cool because that happens like in her dreams, right? Knocking on the window and telling him that's over with, that he's gotten rid of that or whatever, and it won't happen again. And so he decided just to protect them and just keep them happy and not say anything. I like that. It seems believable. And, like he clearly had like that guilt about him over it. It was nice. It seemed to make sense.
We should talk about the information that she discovers in that book because it's important and it's a key piece to unraveling the mystery.
Here's a little lesson in trickery.
Yes.
Just looking at the whole movie.
I also love how subtle this scene is. It gives you just the right amount of information that you can make the proper inferences that you need to without being a whole scene like in The Empty Man where our protagonist goes to the Wikipedia page for tulpa. She finds, looking through this book, she finds a representation of like the same statue, and the book is full of like drawings of mazes and stuff, and we see a couple of passages about how you can build mazes or use reverse architecture of existing architecture to confuse dark spirits that are after you. You can get them lost, basically, by building, reverse houses and mazes and stuff for them to get trapped in so they can't find you. And that this statue thing is sort of like a voodoo doll for like imprisoning a soul and offering it to like the spirit as like a sacrifice or whatever, to like bind a spirit to it. Again, this is all just like some shots of the pages and you can read a little bit. It's like you get what you need to. It's like she doesn't have to go talk to a professor about it to explain like, oh, this is the lore about Bagul.
Yeah. You know what it isn't? It's not a piece of paper that has fucking tulpa written on it.
Yeah.
Which is going to bring me to my next point that I've been fucking sitting on this whole time. This movie is everything that I wanted from The Empty Man. This movie is like go back to our podcast. This is what I wanted. This is what I left wanting more of. A smart protagonist. Like, a smart protagonist. This movie has a fucking tulpa in it. It never needs to tell you that. Like, it does everything better. The detectiving is good. It's intriguing. The film is well-paced and entertaining. It's great. And on top of that, too, very conveniently, last night after we finished watching the movie, because I said that when we walked out, I was like, this is it. This is what I wanted out of The Empty Man. Thank you, movie. I then went to a movie night thing with my buddies in a Discord, and we watched The Empty Man. They picked it out. So I just watched it again last night. So I watched it right afterwards as well, and boy, did it verify all of those things to me. That movie has a really cool, like, last 10 minutes to it, with, like, the cool, like, Nyarlathotep, like, sequence with the Empty Man. But, like, you could have cut 45 minutes of it. It is so boring compared to this film.
I'm still overall an Empty Man defender, but this movie does have a lot of similar themes that I do think are better realized, certainly less clumsily than a lot of things in The Empty Man. We can get into it more as we talk about the end. I'll push back on the tulpa thing a little bit. I don't think that it's necessarily a tulpa. I don't think it's necessarily not, but...
Well, that's sort of the nature of tulpas, yeah.
Whatever. But it does, this movie also, which I did think was pretty funny, has... a literal empty man.
Yeah, right.
Which is some of my, especially we see it more as it gets into the ending of the film. Some of my favorite moments in the film is that like instances where like the architecture in the house, like when you look at it from the exact right angle, it creates like the silhouette of a man. And the couple of times that she sees that, then the silhouette like turns to look at her. Like it keeps doing that every time, and that shit is spooky as fuck.
The
And
space between.
well, I love that too because it's not like a dark spooky like silhouette shadow man or whatever.
No,
like
it's so much better.
It's literally a shape made by just like
the
looking.
absence of things.
Yeah, it is it is a figure that is created by emptiness when observed from the exact right angle, and it's scary.
It's scary, but also beautiful at times. I really love the sort of sequence that leads to the big reveal where first she has that dream where she sees like her husband like murdering different people. She realizes like, okay, yeah, my husband was like bringing people out and like maybe strangling them. She encounters she goes back to the
she goes to the bookstore.
Yeah, she goes to the bookstore. She meets one of those people. I loved all of that. Which, just to cap on point, just to touch on real quick, I did love like that she does like the cartoon like he blew his brains out. She goes like that, like very crass. I liked that. Again, it felt believable and
not sensitive at all.
No, yeah, and again, like that does such a great job of putting the viewer who is obviously like recognizes the reviewer is not as attached to the narrative. Like it helps put them in that character's shoes. I love that. Anyway, she finds that out. She learns that the husband like put her hands on this girl's neck or whatever, and then decided not to. And then she goes back.
She asked him to stop.
Yeah, and he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally, our protagonist goes to the house one last time to drink there and be like, show up, show yourself or whatever.
At this point, she fully believes that there is a ghost. That, like, her husband is trying to communicate with her as a spirit.
As a spirit, yeah.
Because everything else we see in the movie seems to point to that direction. She hears his voice a couple of times in the dreams, like, telling her, like, go to the window, or the boat, go to the boat, go to the house.
And then she steps through the floorboards and finds some corpses.
Several wrapped in plastic, bound the same way that, like, the statue is, with, like, ankles to wrists behind the back.
And runs back to her home, terrified, drinks a lot, falls asleep again. And
no, she goes and gets in the shower.
Oh yeah,
because she's all muddy because it's raining when she finds that, and
we get this wonderful scene where she really starts like calling out to her husband and missing him, and I loved that. Some people might, I feel like, be a little distanced from the character in that scene because like it was just revealed that her husband like to us like murdered those people. Like that's a hell of a time to be calling out to him, like, and saying I miss you. And I love that for a couple of reasons. Without context, it's just painful, right? Because like we know that she still has all these memories of him as a good man.
Well, yeah,
and, like,
that's who she misses. She misses the man that she thought he was before he died. Like that's what she's calling out for.
It's really haunting and sad and beautiful, and such a moving scene, and I really like her crying is so real to me. I was very touched by that, and then
well that is. This scene for like just a couple of minutes almost becomes Ghost with Patrick Swayze.
Yes, it does.
I turned to Sarah when we were watching, and I was like, "Are they gonna get the pottery out?"
Yeah. Well, because like after that, like she looks up and sees like written in the fogged mirror, like somebody's written here. She's like, "Oh, you're actually here," and like she hears water dripping and turns around and like sees wet footprints on the floor, and we get this scene of her like
reaching
touching
out.
him. And I will say the effect is very cool because like she's basically doing like a mime thing where she's like pretending to touch somebody who's not there, but they went to the effort of like having the skin on like her hands and her fingers like compressed, like she's actually touching something. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, compressed, not pressurized.
But
right.
Then she embraces this invisible man and they like start kissing and it starts getting like sexual all of a sudden, and all of a sudden I was like, is this movie turning into Ghost in the last act?
Which is very funny. I just recently watched Community for the first time, and there's a small bit where there's an episode where the cast like goes to take a pottery class at the community college, and the guy who plays Tobias from Arrested Development has a big sign. Who's the teacher has a big sign on the wall that says like no ghost scenes. It's a pottery class. And he gets really mad. He's like, whatever you do, I've seen it a million times. I've seen guy on guy ghost. I've seen girl on girl ghost. I've seen every form and iteration of ghost you can think of. So don't you dare do a ghost. If you do a ghost, you're expelled from this class. Like, it's so good. And I was just thinking about that whole scene is just like, don't you dare do a fucking ghost. And they don't.
Oh no! Well, I mean, it's an incredible fake out because I started to get mad a little bit because I was like, oh no! As I was saying, I was waiting for the film to let me down in the third act.
It's a moment of weakness for her. It's like, oh, we know her husband. We believe her husband's a murderer. Well, I was like, are they gonna legitimately turn this into like a romantic thing? Like, there's part of me that was half expecting that like somebody else murdered those people and killed her husband and made it look like a suicide and like framed him for it. So he was coming back to her as a ghost to like clear his name, because that's been fucking done. And I was like, oh no, are we doing this? But then they do. It's the best fake out because it's so good.
You know, like at the beginning of that scene where, you know, they start like fondling, she's like, are you here? And like you hear his voice, it's kind of distorted and ghostly. He's like, I'm here. And then, you know, as things start to get hot and heavy, she like says his name. She's like, oh, Owen. And then all of a sudden she's like, no, I'm not Owen. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, oh no. Shit. Oh shit.
Horrifying. I was really spooked by that scene. And the texturing like on the voice is so good. It's so like airy and eerie.
Well, it sounds like empty. It sounds hollow. It sounds like which is perfect for, you know, for the theme. It's like his words sound like they're made by like the absence of sound. You know, I don't know exactly how they did it. It's a simple sounding effect, but it works. It's very cool. But yeah, then all the logic breaks down, and we start, and that's the beginning of like the climax where
you get the excellent mirror shot where she's looking in the mirror and sees the other girl from the bookstore.
Oh yeah,
and
with Owen,
you see Owen come in, and things really just break down from there.
Well, yeah, the logic of the house starts to break down, too, as she's, like, fleeing from this invisible presence, that she continues, like, every room she flees into, she looks and, like, and sees its silhouette, like, composed of the empty spaces in the architecture.
All the while, like, in opposite rooms, and sometimes in the same room, Owen is killing, like, more women.
Yeah.
Like, it's so... I love that sequence. What a cool like confrontation. And it comes at the right time too, because you know it was only like one scene away where she encountered like the corpses, and so it's now like her like we get to sort of like have our we can sort of get to spiral out with this revelation as we see it all happening in real time, and not as a fucking flashback, not as anything like that. It's all like cohesive and endemic. Ooh, it's so well done.
None of it has been Owen at all. Yeah. And it's like that's not the first time like a movie has done that, where there's been like a ghost that somebody thinks to be is the ghost of their loved one, and it turns out to be like a demon,
a monster,
or something.
Sure. It's very done.
Like it's done, but at the same time, like the movie still got me.
Yeah.
Like with that revelation, like it's so well constructed that I still didn't quite see it coming
because it was well constructed. Right?
Exactly.
Like, yes, and that's the thing. And I wish more writers and directors would learn from this. It is not about how unexpected the twist is that makes the twist work. It is how much the twist makes sense and how effective it is. You should be able to call most good twists. I think that is totally cool and okay. If it comes out of totally nowhere, it's not fun. to me. I like a good detective story that lets you.
Well, that's the
try and
problem
build it
with a
together.
lot of later Shyamalan twists is they come out of they're unpredictable not because they're so clever but because they're nonsensical.
Yeah, there's no context for
the
them.
movie should, if it's doing its clues right, when the twist is revealed, you should be able to go back and put together all the pieces and be like, aha, all of the pieces were there. I just had to put them together.
Exactly.
Which is
And
why
it's
like
not
Glass is good,
necessarily-
because Glass does that.
It's not necessarily having
Not
a
Glass, Jesus Christ.
predictable
Sorry.
twist.
Unbreakable.
It's having a twist where, looking back, it feels satisfying in how it drip fed you information.
That's the thing. Like, a good twist can give two feelings. Either you're able to see the twist coming, so when it's revealed, you feel smart for guessing it, and you feel rewarded for being like, aha, the movie was leaving me clues and I got it. Either that, or you don't see the twist coming, but when it's revealed, you go back and look at all of the pieces that the movie has fed you and see how you had all of the pieces to get to the twist on your own. And this movie, for me, was the latter, because I did not see the twist coming.
but the breadcrumbs were there.
But they were there. Like, the logic all makes sense. I will say, I think that this scene, like, where she speaks to this entity, like, clothed as Owen, like, in their living room at, like, Christmas or whatever, I do think that it's a little too exposition-y, but at the same time, like, it does clarify a lot of things that otherwise might not be readily apparent. So I don't know if I necessarily have a better way for them to have done it.
I think it was fine. It's fairly short, too.
That is its saving grace, is that they don't use too many words. But it is
also, it comes out of the perfect, like, rule of threes, once again. We have our origin, where she talks about how she died once. The 4 minutes. She gives the story there. And then the second time it's brought up, after the neighbor, like, confesses, like, how he saw Owen with someone else, that scene ends with him saying, "This is the closest to death you've ever been." And she says, "Oh no," and leaves. Like she says,
it's like that. Yeah, like, you're wrong about that one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because, like, as we know, she was essentially dead for 4 minutes once.
Yeah.
And so that's our second time, and then here is our third in our revelation. It's perfect. Not too much, not too little. And again, too, a lot of films, a lot of detective-y films only give you two. They give you one reference to it where the mailman has a weird look, and then the reveal that it's the mailman, right? And here we get, like, three little touches and this final impact where we learn that the nothingness is the monster. Like, the nothingness that she saw is the entity. This demon, this otherworldly creature identifies as the nothingness. It is a thought form. Like,
it is the empty man.
Yeah, like, it is a thought form that exists as the belief of nothingness. When you ascribe, like, that, you're putting a face on it. It's pareidolia becoming real. It's so good.
I love the way it's revealed too, because in that scene, like, it says to her, like, "I'm what you saw when you died," and she says, "No, you're not. I saw nothing." And it says, "Exactly."
Yeah.
Like, that's such
I am the nothingness.
Like, that's such a good way to do it, and that's, like, why it has been represented as, like, this, silhouetted in the absence of space. Like, it is nothing, and it came back with her from death and has been trying to reclaim her by infecting Owen and trying to get him to kill her, to send her back to it. And that's the reason for everything that he's been doing, for the building the backwards house, for killing these women that look kind of like her but are not her. Like, he's trying to confuse it. He's trying to
Trickery.
He's trying to trick it away from her, and he realized eventually that the only way she was going to be completely safe from him is if he kills himself. And that's why his suicide note is great. You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is after you.
So good.
Now
It's so
you're
good.
safe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I do think that it is that particularly, like, it is kind of a movie thing because, like,
Sure.
why be so fucking vague? You know, like if this was real life, in your suicide letter, you would want to be explicit, right?
Well,
like
so what I wonder too is, like, we don't know, like, to what degree it's been puppeting him, and like how much lucidity he has, how much he understands, how much he knows. You can wave that away fairly easily, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie thing. It makes the twist satisfying. In real life, it's a little bit unbelievable.
Well, I mean, a nothingness entity. Yeah, where do you draw that line? Like, for sure. But no, I get what you're saying.
I mean, yeah, for it to be like nothing is after you, like that makes it sound like, oh, don't worry, you're fine. There's nothing after you. You know, you're okay. You're because the next line is you're safe, but instead it's nothing is after you. Like the idea of nothingness that you saw when you died.
Yeah, the tulpa.
Death, like the void on the other side of life, is after you. And it's like, if you're really trying to, like, make her understand, you would be more clear about that in your note.
And so, like, especially when it comes to...
It's not a real complaint, though.
So that's what I mean when I say, like it's also a tulpa, right? Because there are a few, like, iterations on, like, what a tulpa is. And it's more of a Western one in that, like, you can almost just interchange it with the personification of, like, as an entity, right? Like,
well,
so...
it's a chicken or the egg thing. Like, does it exist before, or is it given form by your belief in it?
Yeah.
You know, like, is the nothingness beyond life a true, like a truly existing force that comes for all of us, or was it manifested by
belief,
by Beth's belief in it? I don't know. That's why I don't think it's necessarily a tulpa, but I think it can be.
Well, yeah, and that's what's cool about it, because it all plays into the mirrors and the doppelganger thing too. Like she created it, like, therefore it kind of exists as her. Yeah, it's super cool.
But, like, that's the thing, is, like, she believes that by nothing it is nothing. She doesn't believe in it as, like, a force. If anything, if it is a tulpa, it's a tulpa manifested by Owen, I think.
Yeah.
Because he does believe that there's, that was the thing, is, like, he believes that there's not nothing after life, so if she says that she saw nothing, then maybe Owen is the one who gave nothing form, and that's why it infected him, and it was puppeting him to try to get to her, because it's a product of his belief.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like it takes both of them, like it's almost their child.
Kind of,
like, yeah, which is kind of neat. Like, yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's super cool. It brings, like, Owen's character back around. I won't say it fully redeems him. I think, to quote Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the corpses of the few. But I
don't think it's necessarily meant to redeem him.
No, it doesn't. It just shows how much he loves her, which is cool.
Like that he was willing to do anything to keep her safe. But at the same time, like, what he did didn't work. It still found her. It, like, even beyond him, like, it still
because
came
it's so
for her.
Scary, fucking powerful.
So, like, was his decision to kill himself, like, the right thing? No, not really.
Which is why, and she gets that. She understands that at the end, because she doesn't really defeat it.
No.
Like, that's the thing. Like, the movie doesn't end, and that's a very cool part of it. It's actually also where
that's
I have my one gripe about this movie.
You can't defeat it.
Yeah, and so, like, all of this leads up to her once again in the boat. The nothingness has taken the form of Owen. It is sitting across from her. The moons have split. Like,
one of them is red. I do love that, like, when she looks up and sees it, because, like, the two moons look like eyes
staring back,
and it's reflected in her, in, like, the pupils of her eyes as well.
And it's cool because it is alluded to wonderfully. Like, during one of the early dream sequences, we start to see a bit of a red separation.
When she encounters the night house the first time, when she sails across the lake, and, like, the sort of, like, saturated red light starts to take over, like, we see the moon kind of, like,
it's like a chromatic aberration.
It's like, yeah, it's like blurring. It's like it's splitting into two, like a cellular mitosis.
So cool. So it brings her down to the boat. She's in the boat. She now has the gun. And we see the mirror worlds. We see her in this realm with Owen, the Owen and the entity embodying Owen, all red and naked, as it instructs her, like, come to me, like, blow your brains out. And Meanwhile, we cut back. We snap back to reality. Mom's spaghetti, and we have our friend, our teacher friend,
Claire.
Claire, thank you. Much better to say Claire than teacher friend, like a child. Thank you. We have Claire getting the voicemail that she'd left. We didn't mention that, but whatever. Getting the voicemail and running back. Her rounding the corner, seeing her running down the stairs, swimming out to her as she is out on the boat alone in reality, holding the gun. And it's really it's well shot too, because like it's all from Claire's perspective, and when Claire like comes over the cliffside and looks down, we see once again I can't remember our protagonist's name. We see Beth. We see Beth from the back, like kind of slouched over. I guess slunched isn't a word, but it does describe it. Like kind of over.
Slouched and hunched. And she slunched.
It's almost corpse-like. She's damp. Yeah. And you're left wondering. I like that. They could have shown it more directly. They could have had it at a different angle where she's holding the gun or whatever, and that would have been so fucking cheesy and fake. Such a nice choice to have it still be a little ambiguous as to what's going on, even though we know.
What I like about it too is that like even though Claire jumps in the water and like swims out to the boat to like get her, it's not like Claire doesn't save Beth. Like Beth saves Beth. Beth does make the decision to not shoot herself. Like she in that regard, like she does, at least for another day, defeat the nothingness beyond life. I want
to be real though. I want to be absolutely real. This is my one gripe, right? So now that we've described it, like she decides not to shoot herself, and Beth like takes her back out of the water.
It's a little hokey.
It's hokey, but actually I wanted something hokier to happen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Here's the thing: she's on the boat.
Did you want them to kiss?
No, absolutely not. She's on the boat with the emptiness, right? Like that has now inhabited the form of her husband. This is our first time seeing this being whole as an object, right? And he's given her the gun to shoot herself. I wanted her to say yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, and shoot him. That's what I wanted to happen.
Man, I'm glad that didn't. I'm glad that didn't.
Yeah, it would have been corny. It wouldn't have worked, but I really wanted it. like her to just because she's been kind of badass this whole movie, and just the idea to be like, no, you know what? You're nothingness. I have power. It's the end of like the Labyrinth, right? With David Bowie, it's like, no, I have power over you, motherfucker, and like shoots him. Like, man, it's like, no, I created you. Shut the fuck up. You're nothing. Boom, and like shoot him with the gun, and it just to be like end there. I would have loved that.
Too triumphant.
It would have been cathartic in its own way, but I don't think it would fit the theme of the film.
It would have been hollow.
I think the idea of the nothingness, to go back to the tulpa thing, I don't know if it's necessarily a tulpa. I think it's more of kind of an expression of the idea of death, right?
Which she's struggling with the entire movie.
Yeah, and the whole theme of the movie is trying to escape the reality of death by
it's the 5 stages of grief,
repeating what you knew. And I think the reason the ending is so strong to me is because she's given the option to just end it all and escape by kind of embracing death in a way, and she doesn't, and instead she goes and kind of embraces love, in her very close friend, and in that respect, it's embracing something new and something different, and not just getting stuck in a rut of what was.
But also it's acceptance, right? Like the whole movie is her trying to come to terms with her husband's death, and it ends with her accepting death. Yeah. It's just like the end of the grieving process. The final stage is acceptance. And what I like so much about like the very end of the movie is like when Claire swims with her back to the dock, and like the neighbor pulls her out of the water. She looks back to the boat, and there's like just the faintest impression of like a figure sitting in the boat.
I love it. You know what it is? It's not even. It's the lighting on the waves behind the boat.
Yeah.
Like the small like troughs of the water, the way the light is catching it forms a figure, and it's so subtle.
It's so nicely subtle, and the neighbor says, "What are you looking at? There's nothing there." Mm-hmm. And she says, I know. and then it cuts to credits. So it's like,
which is a much better way to give her power over it,
Yeah.
right? Like, because she
like,
just recognizes it for what is. It's nothing. It's not. It can't actually hurt me.
And that's
Well,
the thing,
but also that-
it can hurt her, and she knows that it's an inevitability eventually.
That's
but
it,
she's come
yeah.
to accept it.
The acceptance of it, yeah.
It's not that it doesn't have power over her. It's that she accepts that it's inevitable, but she's chosen life anyway. But despite that, she knows that, and in the end, it's still there.
Yeah.
It's all like there is no route she can take that does not end there.
Yeah.
But she's acknowledging it. She said, "There's nothing there." I know there's nothing there.
Which is great, because it allows for the film to also, like, all these events to have possibly existed as a psychotic break, but we don't know.
Sure.
But more likely
As
human,
as
which I like.
You're right. Like, it very well could have all been an artifact of her grief.
Mm-hmm. But no, and which will now bring me back around to the original concept of Eastern tulpas, right? Which is, like, as I said on the Empty Man podcast, the thing that the Empty Man fucking misses, which is that, like, traditionally the idea was the student was instructed to create a tulpa, give it life, create this entity, and to believe it into existence. And then the student was instructed to destroy the entity. And if they couldn't, they were sent down the mountain in shame, right? Or in blissful ignorance or whatever. And here, like, she essentially does that. She has created this entity. Like, this entity came across from death with her. Like, she has acknowledged, she's believed that it exists. And she has not banished it fully, but she is able to, like, have agency over it by understanding it and accepting it, right? I think it's quite well done.
Why don't you rate it?
5. There were things, like, I might have preferred, but, like, there's nothing in this film that I would say isn't quality, that isn't, you know, like, up to my, like, standards and expectations. I adored this movie. Like, I don't know, I might, you know, like, down the road, I might say, oh, maybe I should have given it a 4.5 or a 4, but I'm coming hot off of it. I feel really good about it. And again, for me personally, this is, once again, everything I wanted out of The Empty Man, and I was so disappointed by The Empty Man because this is one of my favorite concepts. And I didn't think I was going to see it done well after that movie. And I got it. I did get to have it, after all. And it feels so fucking good. And I just... It is so nice. And just, yeah, fucking 5 out of 5 on this movie from me. Like, yeah, go see it. It's fucking great. And definitely watch it instead of The Empty Man.
Or both. You can have both.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's just so much downtime in that
no
fucking
los
movie.
dos.
Just watch the last 10 minutes of The Empty Man. It's really... the first 20 minutes and the last 10 minutes are great, and then just skip the rest. Jesus Christ.
I disagree, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
That's okay, yeah.
I think this is, much like The Empty Man, a great example of a good movie that's really elevated to great by the third act, and everything coming together really nicely. I think The Empty Man is similar in that because, you know, much like that, it comes together really well in the third act and becomes much better than it was.
Just has a lot of
Yeah.
filler.
So much filler.
And I think this movie does a really good job kind of exploring grief and loss really well. And then with the third act, it comes together and has such a clarity of what it's trying to say with that stuff. That I was really impressed. I think Rebecca Hall gives a really great performance, and the writing is really sharp. It does have a few jump scares that I felt were a little cheap, even though they did make sense in the world. Yeah, overall, I'm going to give it a strong 4 out of 5. I think it's definitely worth checking out.
I'm gonna split the difference between you guys. I thought this movie was really great. I think that it's a really good example of, like, cosmic horror simplified, cosmic horror distilled without being pretentious. Good, sharp writing, as you mentioned, clear, strong thesis. It knows what it's trying to say, and it does it economically. Really great performance by Rebecca Hall. Honestly, one of my favorite, like, lead performances of the year, I think, out of the movies we've seen. I think Rebecca Hall's performance in this movie is right up there. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. This one was a really excellent surprise, because I went into it with no expectations, having seen the trailer once. Just like I walked in and was like, this movie can take me on a journey and do whatever it wants. It can have its way with me, and it did, and I left satisfied. Next week, due to some scheduling stuff, we're not doing a new movie. We're doing Ben's pick, but oh boy, does Ben have a pick for us?
Yeah, so,
you haven't changed your mind, I'm assuming, since we talked about it.
No, so originally we were going to do the new Neil Blomkamp movie Demonic, but it did not release in theaters near us. Whatever, end of the year is always there if we really want to watch it. We've done a lot of very serious, interesting movies, and I felt like it was time to do something a little weirder. So I want to do Harmony Korine's take on the found footage genre, Trash Humpers.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I'll admit I had to be talked into this one a little bit, just because I don't think that it is a horror film in the traditional sense. The reason why I do think that it's a good fit for the podcast, though, other than just that it's a fucking awesome movie that I'm excited to watch again, is that though it's not a traditional horror, I think it is, for the average viewer, easily as unsettling as a horror movie.
I think this is a great conversation topic for the podcast because I very much think it's a horror movie.
It's been super high on my list for ages. I love the Harmony Korine movies I've seen, so it'll be nice. I've been baby on it, and it sounds like a pod movie.
It's also, it's like our one opportunity to talk about Harmony Korine on the podcast, because like none of his other movies are horror at all, or as unsettling in the same way as Trash Humpers. So I also think that this will probably be our least accessible film that we've ever talked about on the podcast.
Yeah, for now.
For now, I've thought about in the future at some point picking Begotten. We'll see, but I think this is gonna be a weird one. So for our listeners out there, strap yourselves in.
3 little devils jumped over the log.
Yeah, get ready for a lot of that.
I don't know what that means, but I'm excited to find out.
You're about to find out.
Yeah.
All right, so next week will be Trash Humpers. Cleve, if you want to grab the canister, see who our
off of the sponsor shelf.
Off of the sponsor shelf.
Of course I will. Let me see this week who is going to form out of the void to become the thought form of our sponsor.
Manifest that money into our account.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I have been handed a scrap of paper by the sponsor shelf, and the single word tulpa is not written on it. Thank God, because that's lazy writing. This episode is brought to you by the satisfying feeling of a job well done. Well done.
Well done.
I think we've all done a good job today. We recorded a podcast, You listen to a podcast.
It feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you know what? Even though it's a nice thing to do in your off time, it's still productive. I think we all maybe learned something today, hopefully. I don't think we're really here for edutainment, but, sometimes there's good morality and lessons in horror, and
Gentlemen,
it's nice to learn those things.
Well done.
We did it.
Good
job, everybody.
Cleveland, well done. Ben, well done.
Likewise,
Good
friend.
job.
Listeners, well done for listening to this podcast. This episode brought to you by the satisfying feeling of a job well done. Oh, and now Cleveland is eating the sponsor. But no, you have to finish it because that's the satisfying feeling of a job well done.
Is it satisfying? It doesn't taste very good.
It doesn't, but you've started now, so you have to finish the job.
I don't know if it's a good bit anymore. I kind of changed my mind halfway through.
Swallow it.
No!
Swallow it.
I don't want to.
Well, you're not going to spit it out.
That was paper.
Yeah, just get it over.
No. Why did I do this?
I don't know. Well, that's a podcast. That's a pod people first. Is Cleveland eating the sponsor after reading it? Fantastic. What a good way to end the show. If you also enjoyed the sound of Cleveland eating the paper, I wish you could see the look on his face right now, then be sure to support the show by heading over to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a 5-star rating and a nice review. If you want to support the boys, you can also do so at patreon.com/podpeoplepod. We got 3 different subscriber tiers that you can subscribe to, the highest of which is Honorary Podboy. Thanks to our current Honorary Podboys, Sam Simon and Sarah Morris. Honorary Podboy gives you the ability to suggest films for us to review. We got a big spreadsheet of all of those, and we pick one at random, and we talk about it. So that could be you at patreon.com/podpeoplepod. But fear not, none of our content is paywalled. You'll always get every episode for free. So if you don't want to become a patron, that's okay too. You can follow us on Twitter at podpeoplepod and at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show, as well as our average ratings and links to those reviews. I'm on Twitter at SomeSpookySnake.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tweeting. I am occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studios. We further progress on It Stares Back. Recently, we just released. We put out the first few levels of our new chapter, The Drowned Queen, on our exclusive to members of our Discord community. So hop on by if you want to try out some new chapters in our game. But most importantly, I believe as of this episode's airing, Spookware will be out, which is the game I've been working on recently, doing QA for.
I think they released on the same day.
Highly recommended. It is essentially like WarioWare, but with a really fun narrative surrounding these cute little skeleton bros and on their travels and adventures through Post-Corpia, the land of the dead. And it's a bunch of fun, cute little micro games and mini games, lots of fun, cute little puns and other things. It's adorable. The soundtrack is fan-fucking-tastic. I cannot recommend it enough. Please go check out Spookware. It rules. And that'll be it from me.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. As always, we very much appreciate you, the listener. Tune back next week to hear our review of Harmony Korine's Trash Humpers. And until then, rest assured, there is nothing after this podcast.
I'm not swallowing this paper.